Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Whenever and wherever you're listening, welcome to Way Outta Here, the Philly sports podcast with fan perspective from way outside the greater Philadelphia area. My name is Steve Prudente, here with you to take you on the journey for the next half hour or so, coming to you in the middle of a very cold stretch in January. 2026 is off to a start. Let's call it a start. The topic for today, as you may have guessed by checking out the episode description, is Unhappy New Year. I'll talk about some struggles that the Philadelphia sports teams have had since we flipped the calendar. But before I get into all that, I'd like to remind you to subscribe to me on the social media platform of your choice on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, Way Outta Here Podcast, on Blue Sky, Way Outta Here Pod, on the blog, wayoutaherepodcast.blogspot.com, and if you've got any feedback, you can always send an email to wayoutaherepodcast@gmail.com. Available just about wherever you find your podcasts. On Apple and Spotify, I'd appreciate a rating, and on Apple, I'd appreciate a review even more. Thank you so much in advance. I will begin as I always do by introducing the beer of the show. Today's selection is the Hopslam Ale from Bell's Brewery, and I'll have more on that at the end of the show. All right, let's get into it. As I said at the top, today's topic is going to be Unhappy New Year due to some of the struggles our Philadelphia sports teams have been enduring over the first couple of weeks of 2026. I waited a little bit after the Eagles' playoff defeat to the San Francisco 49ers just to let the dust settle a little bit, clear my own head, and also when I'm doing a topic that's not necessarily about my personal experience, either going to a game or something I might have seen relating to Philly sports from way outside the Philadelphia area, if it's just me talking thoughts about the games, I might try to wait a little bit just to give you a little bit of insight into why I was a little bit delayed getting this to you guys. I want to try to make this a little bit more, not evergreen, but something that's not going to be expired within, 24 hours or 48 hours. I try to avoid those, and there was a lot of stuff that happened over the last couple of weeks since the Eagles' defeats, which I will get into. Well, let's start with them, actually. I like to try to lead with the positivity here, but as much as I try that, there's not a ton of positivity to go with from the Eagles side of things. We saw them absolutely flame out versus the San Francisco 49ers at Lincoln Financial Field a couple of Sundays ago. The game itself was kind of a microcosm of what we saw all season, and even in that second half, maybe even that final drive, a microcosm of that whole season, encapsulated into those small snippets of play. It looked to me like the defense still did enough to win. They certainly weren't perfect. There were a couple of opportunities there that, especially that final touchdown drive, it looked like the defense was kind of starting to wear down. That's obviously not their fault completely. They, in my opinion, like I just said, I think that they did enough to put this team in a position to win, and the Eagles' offense just could not capitalize. 2 turnovers. You get 2 interceptions in the third quarter and fourth quarter. Quinyon Mitchell, great stats in the postseason. Such an anomaly that he has no interceptions in the regular season, but when the bright lights of the playoffs come up, he shines bright and got us a couple of interceptions. The Eagles' offense, though, only able to manage 3 points off of those turnovers. Ultimately, the offense is what did them in this game, and it is what did them in just about all season. You think back to the Chicago Bears loss on Black Friday, that might be the only game I put on the defense having lost where they gave up well over 200 rushing yards. That's just something you're going to have a hard time overcoming. But other than that, I would put every single loss this year on the offense. Specifically, this past game, A.J. Brown definitely needed to be better. He had 3 balls that were thrown his way that were in his hands. One he was definitely interfered with, but he still had his hand on it. I think a guy of his caliber, he should be able to make that catch. And that one in the fourth quarter with the Eagles trailing and driving to try to come back and win the game, absolutely inexcusable drop. Do not want to see that. He got bailed out by Dallas Goedert, who had an awesome game and has been another awesome playoff performer for this team over his career. And the Eagles nearly pulled it off, but they get down there inside the red zone, and it's 4th down, the season on the line, and they come up with the most vanilla play call. You have all season to plan for this, all offseason even. Nick Sirianni and all of his coaching staff, including Kevin Patullo, who we'll get to in a bit, of course, had a chance all the time in the world before this, leading up to this game and this season and this moment to plan for that, and that is the play call they come up with. They run 4 verticals, and Dallas Goedert crossing, and Jalen Hurts ends up throwing it into triple coverage. We know what happened. The Eagles turn it over on downs, lose, season over, and you certainly were well within your right to feel extremely disappointed after that loss. This team has so much talent on paper, had won a Super Bowl last year, had gone to a Super Bowl 2 years prior. The expectation certainly was, at the very least, you make it out of the first round, make a little bit of a run, and they fell well short of that, of course. You were well within your right to say that this was a very disappointing and discouraging loss. I was kind of expecting it, sadly. I know I do have the optimism in me, always as a fan. I hope that they're going to pull it together, especially, as I said, with the amount of talent that they have on paper. You would think that they'd be able to pull it out somehow, some way. Many times this year, I feel like this team won just solely because of the amount of talent they had, and in spite of their coaches. Not to be, though, against the 49ers. And I did see a lot of, I'll say, outlandish takes saying that this was the most disappointing Eagles loss ever. I hear that just about every season when we lose in the playoffs and we don't make it to the Super Bowl or win the Super Bowl. I think this is not even in my top 10 or maybe even the top 20 worst Eagles losses I've ever seen. It's nowhere near that bad. But still, it was I guess I'll say it was a fitting end to a very strange, very frustrating season. 2023 was still much worse, and I'll go way back to the worst Eagles season of my life was in 1994 when they were 7-2, had a chance to make it into the playoffs relatively early, and then lost their final 7 straight games under Coach Rich Kotite, who was fired at the end of the season, missed the playoffs, and that ushered in, well, a different era, not necessarily a whole new era of Eagles football, but that is still the worst Eagles season I think I've ever experienced. Most frustrating, though, this past one would certainly be up there, along with at least 2 of the Chip Kelly seasons. Any rate, as a result of that, to the surprise of just about no one, Kevin Patullo was fired. Offensive coordinator Kevin Patullo fired just a couple days later. I don't think that there was any way this team could possibly run it back with him on the coaching staff. Now, this is the interesting little twist to this. They relieved him of his duties. They came to, I guess, a mutual agreement that he's no longer going to be coordinating the offense, but left the door open for him to possibly return in some role. I don't know how that's going to work. I don't see it. Maybe they come up with something creative and they give him one of those, title that's just in name only. He doesn't really do a whole ton out of respect for the guy because let's be honest. Let's give the guy some credit. The Eagles did win a Super Bowl last year with him as part of this coaching staff, and he wasn't doing nothing last year or the previous years under Sirianni. Just sometimes people aren't fit for the role that they're elevated to. I mean, we saw even Nick Sirianni as a head coach being the offensive play caller. Wasn't very good at that job. Let it go, and his best teams have been the ones where he has kind of been the CEO coach, setting the culture, setting the trends, making sure everybody's on the same page and aware of what's going on. That's Nick Sirianni's strength. He's a culture setter. Like him or hate him or feel frustrated with him or whatever you do at times, the guy has a fantastic record as a head coach, and I'm not going to disparage that. There were a lot of people calling for his head as well. You as a fan are well within your right to say those sorts of things. Realistically, they weren't ever going to fire a guy who just won a Super Bowl last year and had taken them to another one, has made the playoffs 5 straight years, has the best winning percentage of an Eagles head coach in history, and is, if he figures it out and sticks around for even longer, could, over the long haul, maybe challenge Andy Reid for some of those records. I'm not going to put the cart before the horse here. We're coming off of a very strange, weird season, and a lot of things have to go in a different direction for that to happen. But nonetheless, the very least, Kevin Patullo is out, so there's going to be a change there, and that was expected. A lot of people have also said that Jalen Hurts was culpable and part of the problem. The other really bizarre thing about this year, as frustrated we were with the offense, well, Jalen Hurts had 2,000-yard receivers, and he had, on paper, one of his statistically best seasons of his career. So that's just, it's odd. It's weird. It's bizarre. I don't know quite what to make of that, but like I said, a lot of people said he's part of the problem. Look, he's not without his faults either. It's, you win as a team, you lose as a team. Jalen Hurts is, guess what, part of this team. But I still trust in his abilities, especially when it is in a big game, big moments. He has come up on the right side of those moments more often than he has not. And we've seen it at least twice in his career. He probably could have won that first Super Bowl if not for some inopportune, just weird, I said that word again, weird things that just didn't go that team's way. But he played at an MVP level. If they pulled that out, I have no doubt in my mind he would have won the MVP of that Super Bowl. Is he part of the problem though? A little bit, for sure. He's not without his faults. But I would not be out there trying to get rid of this guy or replace him or have any kind of quarterback controversy like some of the really, really out there takes I have seen online. Where the Eagles go from here? Well, we'll still have to wait and see. This was one of the butterfly effect games where one thing happens and changes the future of a franchise after the fact. We've been seeing a lot of these this time of year, and especially this year. It feels like the coaching carousel has gone absolutely off the rails. I believe we may be up to 10 different openings or 10 different coaches changing jobs after this past week's games, the divisional round. Go back to the final week of the regular season. That Steelers-Ravens game, John Harbaugh was fired shortly thereafter, after losing that game and missing the playoffs. And then a week later, Mike Tomlin, his Steelers, bow out in the first round. He steps down. And this past week, Sean McDermott's Buffalo Bills lost in heartbreaking fashion in overtime to the Denver Broncos, and he's let go after a long tenure of coach there. Former Eagles defensive coordinator Sean McDermott is out, and that's part of this carousel. There's a lot of people that are going to be changing places. John Harbaugh has already committed to the Giants, so we'll be seeing a lot more of him. A lot of people have been saying that worries them. Look, guys, it's still the Giants. There's a lot of work to be done on that roster. They'll be better, for sure. Harbaugh is a heck of a coach, but I would not go too far in the future, because there's a lot of things that need to fall into place for a team to truly be good. We've seen that ourselves. Former Philadelphia resident Kevin Stefanski, who was fired by the Cleveland Browns, has gone on to the Atlanta Falcons, so he'll be in the NFC. We'll be seeing him a lot more. The Eagles are still searching. There's been a whole bunch of rumors, but we'll see what happens. A couple of those candidates are off the board. I wanted to mention those. I also wanted to mention that Andy Reid now, I believe, is the longest tenured head coach in the league. Former Eagle Andy Reid, who had the longest stint as an Eagles head coach in my lifetime. And at the time he was let go, he was the longest tenured coach in the league back in 2012. So he has held that distinction now for 2 different teams. I'd be curious if anybody else has ever had that honor, or distinction, I guess you could say. I might look into that later. I probably won't. If you have that information, or your name happens to be Reuben Frank, please let me know. At any rate, I will be keeping a side eye to the rest of these NFL playoffs. I did watch sporadically throughout the weekend the games that were on. My playoff favorites after the Eagles left were going to be Buffalo and Chicago, but both of those teams were eliminated in overtime of their games, respectively, in the same afternoon, within less than 24 hours anyway. So now I guess, by default, I'm going to be rooting for the Denver Broncos and the Seattle Seahawks. I have nothing really against the Rams and Sean McVay. They've won a Super Bowl more recently. I don't love to see teams, other than the Eagles, of course, getting back to too many Super Bowls. And the Broncos are facing the New England Patriots, who I think they've had enough success to last them a whole century. I'd really like not to see them back in a Super Bowl. But we'll see what happens. The NFC Championship the championship games are being played coming up this Sunday. Yeah, here's hoping. It might end up being a pretty boring Super Bowl, but will I watch? That's still up in the air. We'll see what happens. So that's how I feel currently about the Eagles as things currently sit today. Recording this on Tuesday afternoon, January 20th. Things could change rapidly, of course, but that's how I feel about that. We'll move on to the Philadelphia Phillies, who added to the 2026 disappointment. For the first couple of weeks, there were rumors that started to come out of nowhere, seemingly, and then really escalated with Bo Bichette being rumored to be the favorite stop for him in free agency. He's looked for another deal, moving on from the Toronto Blue Jays after they lost the World Series in heartbreaking fashion as well in 7 games last year. a lot of people were really excited about it. I had tempered expectations, mostly because I didn't see how he would fit, and they'd have to move a lot of pieces around in the infield to make it work. That said, an offensive talent like him, who does not swing and miss a whole lot, which has been a big problem for the Phillies over the last couple of seasons, it was exciting to think about the prospect of having him on board. But Justin Klugh of the Hittin' Season podcast had, I think, thrown cold water on that pretty quickly early on in the process, and then it still continued to escalate. There were rumors from many big-name writers in the Major League Baseball sphere of influence, and then all of a sudden, seemingly out of left field, no pun intended, he signed with the New York Mets. A 3-year deal, it's some weird thing where it's like a 1 year and then you have an opt-in option, I guess. But 3 years, $126 million total, which something that I think the Phillies for sure could have afforded. I don't know if they got played for fools by his agent and his representation, but that's kind of what it felt like. Feel like they did the Phillies a little dirty and kind of used them as a marketing ploy. And so he goes to the Mets, our hated rivals of all the teams to go to. Jesus. This after the Mets were courting Kyle Tucker, who of course went to the Los Angeles Dodgers instead. All this happened within like a 24-hour span. Dodgers pick up Kyle Tucker, the rich get richer, and then the Mets get Bo Bichette, pour some salt on our wounds. Right after we had found out a couple of days prior that Ranger Suarez, our starting pitcher, would be leaving. I kind of expected that, but he left in free agency to the Boston Red Sox. Good for him. I'm happy for him. I knew that he was going to leave. There's just no way I saw him fitting in, and I wish nothing but the best for him in Boston. But this Bo Bichette thing leaves a little bit of a sour taste in our mouth because then we signed JT Realmuto. Again, God love the guy, great catcher over his career, and we have so many moments to thank because of his bat and his defense behind the plate. But 3 years, $45 million for him is a bit much at his age, and that's the consolation prize. It leaves me feeling quite a bit salty. Now, that said, there are people that are saying the season is over. Guys, it's not even spring training yet. Season is not doomed. Let's just wait to see a little bit how this plays out. That said, I'm not all that optimistic about it. But I will put a little bit more of a positive spin on this as well, because if there's one thing we know of the last 25, 30 years, the Mets are going to Mets. That's a verb. And they usually find a way to screw up something fantastic. They did, of course, a couple seasons ago, beat the Phillies in the playoffs. That was kind of their World Series. And they flamed out shortly thereafter, and then followed that up with they had a huge signing last offseason too, in Juan Soto. And last year was nothing short of a disappointment for them, even though most of the baseball pundits, and myself included, looked at what they had on their roster and all the holes that were there, didn't really see how it was going to work out, and lo and behold, it didn't. So my sign of optimism is that this is still the Mets, and if there's a way to screw it up, they will probably figure it out. But back to the Phillies. The outfield now does not look great on paper. I don't know what's going to happen with Nick Castellanos. I guess I'm assuming he's going to have to come back now. Do they have enough money left over to maybe re-sign Harrison Bader? I don't know. But the offense still definitely has some gaps that are going to probably need to be filled, maybe at the trade deadline. I don't know what kind of pieces they could pick up. They could be relying on the young prospects to come up, like Aiden Miller and Justin Crawford, to fill some of those gaps. In the rotation, we're still looking okay, in my opinion. Of course, Ranger Suarez leaving doesn't help, but we do have Zach Wheeler hopefully coming back healthy. Hope as a tactic is never great either, but him hopefully coming back. Jesus Luzardo in a contract year, and of course our Cy Young candidate, Christopher Sanchez, anchoring that rotation, and maybe prospect Andrew Painter coming up from Lehigh Valley over the summer. So there are signs for optimism. I would just temper that enthusiasm a little bit. I'm not going to get my hopes too high for this season. If they pleasantly surprise me, though, I will happily take it. The season is not doomed. It is only January, guys. Take a deep breath. We'll move now to a team that started 2026 in good fashion, but had a little struggle of late, and that's the Sixers, who were swept by the Cavs last week at home after splitting a series with the Toronto Raptors previously. So the Sixers had a little bit 3-game skid going on there before a nice rebound versus the Indiana Pacers. They were at the time knocked out of the top 6 in the Eastern Conference, but now are back in 5th. and they play the Phoenix Suns, tough opponent from the Western Conference, tonight. So things can change rapidly. This is par for the course right now at this time of year where everybody's still jockeying for position. It's still relatively early in the season. We're about halfway. Okay, so the Sixers have not been awful in 2026. Despite the title of this podcast, they've been actually okay. They've been mid. They're 6-4 as we sit here today. Looking back on the season so far, we've been getting MVP level play from Tyrese Maxey. Will he realistically win it? Probably not. But he's been really blossoming into that type of NBA superstar that, well, not a lot of us were really expecting him to go this far, but it's been a pleasant surprise, as has most of the team throughout this season. Looking forward to hopefully seeing him continue that in the second half. We've been getting Rookie of the Year level play from VJ Edgecombe. He's been a fantastic compliment to Tyrese Maxey. And when Paul George and Joel Embiid have been healthy, they've actually been productive of late. So it took them a little while to get going this season. And had that joke a couple of podcasts ago about their losing record when they had the big three in the lineup. And it looks like that has kind of gone by the wayside as of late. I know the Sixers kind of got a little bit of a rough patch last week. Lost a very close one to the Cavs. And it's not like they got blown out by the Raptors. Looked like they've been kind of figuring things out. Instead of having so many offensive pieces that they didn't know what to do with, you have a whole lot of ball-dominant players and not necessarily knowing who you want to take control. They've been kind of figuring that out, and Nick Nurse has done a good job of making all these pieces fit together. As I said before, the team overall has been a pleasant surprise. Now, that does create a little bit of a problem because we're in a little bit of a tough spot organizationally as we head towards the trade deadline in less than 3 weeks. Oddly enough, it is on the same day that the NHL Olympic break begins, on February 5th. So, in a bit of a weird situation right now, because do you buy at the deadline and try to go on a run? I don't know that this team is capable of beating any team in the West, but depending on who you ask, they have enough talent and have been playing well enough at times that if they can put it together, they could potentially win the East. Again, because of past failures, I'm not going to get my hopes too far in that direction, but the potential is certainly there. You could also go the other way and sell off a couple of pieces to try to keep the team from going too far over the luxury tax and maybe not mortgaging the future on this one season that is, percentage-wise, compared to some of the previous years, not as likely to end in a championship or even a run to the finals. It's an odd spot. It's an odd situation to be in, something we haven't really truly experienced with this team in, a decade? Before the process era, certainly. So we'll keep our eyes peeled on that, and of course, like I said, the Sixers are playing tonight, hoping that they can continue their strong play of late, even though they had a couple losses last week. They still looked like they were competitive, not getting totally blown out of the water most nights, and there's always still a chance that this season's for sure better than last was already, but there's always still a chance that this season could end better than worse. The other active wintertime team in Philly sports, the Philadelphia Flyers, have had a very rough start to 2026. They had lost 6 straight before they finally got off the schneid versus the Vegas Golden Knights last night, Monday night. They started their return home after the Disney on Ice trip, actually, with a great emotional win over the Anaheim Ducks and William Quitter Gauthier. That was a fantastic watch. Some dirty play, of course, though, because the Ducks are, well, let's face it, a dirty team. They have a dirty head coach who got away with some heinous acts back in the 2010 Cup Finals. We don't need to go into detail about that. We'll see the Ducks again in a few weeks. I look forward to watching that game. But that game was sadly, it was not a harbinger of things to come. So right in there was a little bit of controversy with some of the fan base because they signed forward Christian Dvorak to a 5-year deal. A lot of uproar over the cap number, which is going to actually go down. I don't see why people were so upset about it. He's been an incredibly productive offensive player for us this year. A great compliment to Trevor Zegras, who has really had a resurgence this year since coming over from those Anaheim Ducks. And most of the season, up until the last 7 games, the Flyers have looked very competitive. That said, things for some reason took a turn for the worse right after that Anaheim game. They looked largely uncompetitive for long stretches of games. they're just not scoring enough goals anymore without Tyson Forster. At the time he went out of the lineup about a month or so ago, he was their leading goal scorer, and they've not really been able to find a consistent answer for that. Now, Travis Konechny had a fantastic game versus Vegas last night, put a couple of goals on the scoreboard. Hopefully he gets himself going, because at this point in the season, the injuries are really starting to pile up. We saw goalie Dan Vladar go down, Bobby Brink's been out, and versus the Rangers on Saturday, an absolutely gruesome injury that you probably don't want to go back and look at to forward Rodrigo Abels, who was slated to be part of the Latvian Olympic team. He is most likely not going to make it. I haven't really followed up on that news, but it did not look very good. I think he's going to be out till probably next season, and that's unfortunate. But at any rate, the injuries have been piling up, so some of these guys coming up from Lehigh Valley are going to have to fill those spaces and score those goals in the meantime. And hopefully, last night against the Vegas Golden Knights, a very, very tough effort from Sam Ersson, played incredibly well in goal, only allowed that one goal, despite the Flyers getting knocked for 7 penalties. Most of them were their fault too, so that's got to get cleaned up. But hopefully, this sets them back on the right track, because we are at less than 3 weeks to that Olympic break I mentioned earlier. The Flyers' last game is on the NBA trade deadline day, so that will for sure be a busy day in the Philly sports universe. And then I'm actually really excited to finally watch some Olympic hockey again. It's been 4 years, and it's been even longer since we've seen the NHL players in the Olympics, so that is for sure very exciting to look forward to. In addition to hoping that the Flyers can right the ship for the rest of the season, and maybe make some noise heading into the trade deadline, and hopefully a playoff spot. Lastly, but certainly not least, the Philadelphia Union recently let Mikael Outta go in a free transfer. Just another one of these players biting the dust in this fire sale of an offseason. They did re-sign Captain Alejandro Bedoya. Again, love the guy. It's probably been enough is enough at this point, but he's going to be back for at least one more season. Nothing really much else to add on that front, but the preseason does begin. They're in Spain, starting on January 20th, which is tonight. So soccer is already right around the corner. I still don't know exactly what this roster is going to look like. I have very low expectations, but a point of optimism, I had low expectations heading into last season, and we wound up with a supporters shield. Is that realistic? Of course, probably not, but we'll see. Well, that will do it for the sports section of this podcast. I will finish up, as I always do, by outroing the beer of the show. Today's selection I chose is the Hopslam Ale from Bell's Brewery. This is a beer that's brewed once a year, right around this time of year. Typically, I guess, is released in late December. I typically find my way to picking it up in early January. The description on Untappd reads, starting with 6 different hop varietals added to the brew kettle and culminating with a massive dry hop addition of Simcoe hops, Bell's Hopslam Ale possesses the most complex hopping schedule in the Bell's repertoire. A biting, bitter tongue bruiser of an ale with a name like Hopslam. What did you expect? Well, that is true. It is a bitter tongue bruiser of an ale, and it features one of my favorite varieties of hops in the Simcoe, but it is also brewed with some honey to kind of mellow things out, give it a little bit of that mild sweetness. 10% ABV. It is a pretty big, beefy boy. So keep that in mind if you do go out and try to pick this up. Might want to stick to your living room or your basement bar if you're going to imbibe a couple of these. But this is a beer that I look forward to every year, and this year's variety, did not disappoint one iota. Smooth, bitter, a little bit of everything in between, easy to drink, and I'm just so happy that it's back. Good to see that the more things change, some things do stay the same, and Hopslam Ale is one of those things. So you can get this probably just about wherever you find your beers. And look for it. Hopslam Ale by Bell's. Well, that will do it for this episode of the Way Out Here podcast. I do appreciate you swinging by. Sorry that our Philly sports teams have not been so great to start this year, but there is a lot of 2026 left and plenty of time for them to turn things around, of course. If you don't already, please subscribe to me on the social media platform of your choice. On Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, Way Outta Here Podcast. On Blue Sky, Way Outta Here Pod. On the blog, wayoutofherepodcast.blogspot.com. And if you've got any feedback, you can send me an email to wayoutofherepodcast@gmail.com. This is available just about wherever you get your podcasts. On Apple and Spotify, a rating would be awesome. On Apple, a review would be even awesomer. Thank you so much in advance. Until next time, be safe in whatever it is that you do.